So yeah, let's dive into the history. So Duran Duran was truly a band. I know normally, oftentimes in this kind of this new wave, synthwave pop music of the 80s, I sometimes think of a singular star and then there's a bunch of players behind them. But Duran Duran was truly a band. And normally we pick one person, either the namesake or the focus, but we're going to kind of hit all five guys who were in the band today. So having said that, there were two main founders of the band, though, a guy named Nick Rhodes and John Taylor. There was a third guy that started out the band with them named Stephen Duffy, but he left the band before they got big, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But as a quick note, for the lineup of Duran Duran that recorded Rio, the album we're covering tonight, there are three guys in the band with the same last name of Taylor. It was maddening. In fact, on the front cover of the book, I drew their names and their instrument underneath them. And whenever I needed help, I would flip to the front and look at which guy with lipstick was the one I needed to talk about. So the story really starts with the childhood friendship of John Taylor and Nick Rhodes. Now, John, whose first name is actually Nigel, but who I'll call John for the remainder of the episode, was born in 1960 and grew up in a middle-class neighborhood called Hollywood in Worcestershire, England. And
I'm going to guess that's not the appropriate pronunciation.
I'm guessing somebody from our Worcestershire, somebody from our British contingent of listeners, please write in and tell me how I butchered that.
Right. That's like Mecca, Kansas,
Right.
Yeah. Right. All right. You're in Peru, Illinois, or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So since we've got a lot to cover, we're going to breeze past his childhood and jump right into 1972. And that's because John is 12 years old then, and he sees David Bowie perform as Ziggy Stardust on a show in England that we've mentioned 100 times on this podcast, and that is Top of the Pops. Anyone with a TV was watching Top of the Pops every Thursday evening in England. It was a force and a real trendsetter for pop culture at the time. By age 15, he was completely obsessed with pop music. He loved T-Rex and Bowie, and he would frequently skip school, take a bus into central Birmingham, and spend the entire school day walking around to various record stores in the city center. And fun fact, there was a record store chain in England called Threshold that was owned by the Moody Blues. In case you're ever hit with that question at a dinner table, it was the Moody Blues.
I wonder how you pass that off to your parents as a kid. You leave to go to school and you come back with like 5 new records. And like, what the hell? Oh, they're just giving out records at school. Is that what happened?
He said he would time it so that as the bus was pulling up, he would run down the block so it looked like he hopped off the bus. Smart guy. Or a complete liar. Either way. So John eventually meets this guy named Nick Rhodes. And before anyone corrects me, yes, his name is actually Nick Bates. And he eventually changes it to Nick Rhodes in honor of the Rhodes electric piano. But just to keep things straight, we'll keep calling him Nick Rhodes. So Nick grew up in Birmingham as well, the only child of a pretty affluent couple. And Nick meets John in 1973 through a mutual friend. Now, Nick is 11 and John is 13. And their musical aspirations would proceed side by side for much of their lives. Now, John had never met someone who was as obsessed with music as Nick. Nick's room was covered in posters of David Bowie, Lou Reed, Mark Bolan, Roxy Music. And in addition to that, he had piles of music magazines laying all over his room, like Melody Maker and New Musical Express, NME. And Nick was slowly becoming a musical encyclopedia. So in addition to becoming a sponge of the music world, he started adopting this kind of androgynous style that he saw coming out of England at the time from all these pop bands. And he absolutely loved it.
What's great about that is, you didn't say Beatles and Rolling Stone.
Right.
Or Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And so, already he's like into T-Rex and Bowie.
Yeah,
so
right.
Already is kind of in the more alternative kind of scene.
And we're forward a generation as well.
Right.
Now, this poor guy, Nick, he paid the price for being androgynous and having the last name Bates at school and was often called Master Bates, and something that stuck with him for quite some time. Kids
Yeah.
are the worst, and kids are
You
hilarious.
gotta love kids. I mean, if it's right there for you, how can you
Yeah.
pass that up? You know,
Yeah.
come
Right.
on. Also, all the kids out there are making fun of somebody calling him masturbates. It's like, dude, I don't even want to see what the behind your bed looks like with all the. I'm sure you are cranking one out every hour on the hour when you're 13 years old. You can cut
Right,
that,
right.
Adam.
No idea.
Maybe just the behind the bed part, because
Right.
what you're talking about.
You know, it's got
We'll
to
be
go
clever.
somewhere.
So Nick and John started going to concerts together as well, and even managed to sneak into a Rod Stewart show back when Rod was a bona fide rock star. Nick was apparently able to sweet talk his way around security and snuck into the front row. Good sign of a very magnetic personality there. Now, Nick was also really into the avant-garde stuff going on at the time, like Roxy Music and Brian Eno. And that kind of dovetailed into Nick's other passion, which was fashion. And I don't think anyone would be surprised to hear that someone from Duran Duran was into fashion. In fact, he used to quote a guy named Brian Ferry, who was the frontman for Roxy Music, when he said, and this is the Roxy Music guy, uh, other bands want to wreck hotel rooms. Roxy Music wants to redecorate them. So John,
Rock and roll.
rock and roll.
Yeah.
John gets his first acoustic guitar as a present from his parents on his 16th birthday, and he somehow convinces his parents when he completes school to basically fund his efforts to form a band instead of getting a real job. His father had just been laid off from the car factory, and they still agreed to basically give him money while he goes to try to be a rock star.
That's
I mean,
gotta-
if that's a British car factory, it's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Is what I know about cars.
I was gonna say that's got to be mom is just like you have to support him, and dad's just drinking in the corner like God damn it, like
Yeah.
work my
Goddamn
ass off, and I gotta
kids.
look at his fucking haircut, puffy ass pants. I do like, by the way, how and I did watch a documentary like an hour and a half ago about Duran Duran, and one of the things that Nick was talking about is basically they had this whole plan to become rock stars, and then at one point he and John were like, oh, we should probably actually learn how to play instruments, right? Like the plan to be a rock star pre-existed them playing instruments by several years.
Which is
But come on, that's got to have happened a lot
hell yeah.
Yeah.
in the history of rock music. I mean, I bet there's been a lot of stories just on this podcast where people are like, first I wanted to be a rock star, then I learned how to play my instrument. There's
Well,
a lot of
listen,
like famous bands.
everybody wants to become a rock star and then they get an instrument. It's just usually not like, and then 4 years later, I buy my first instrument.
We thought maybe we should pick up an instrument.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now Nick is only 14 years old. He's still in school, but with an acoustic guitar in hand, John wants to get moving and start playing and making music. But wait, no one ever started a career with an acoustic guitar. So John takes all his albums, sells them, makes 15 pounds, and that is enough for him to buy a cheap electric guitar and amp. And in 1977, he forms his first band called Shock Treatment.
Shock Treatment?
Yes, like
I like it.
the Edgar Winter album.
I like it. Yeah.
Of course, I had to bring in Edgar Winter at some point. So while John is out working with his new band Shock Treatment, Nick starts to get into synthesizers. And on his 16th birthday in 1978, his mother buys him an inexpensive and locally produced synthesizer called a Wasp, which are pretty badass if you look at them, but it's odd they don't actually have keys. It's a pad that has keys drawn on it, and you can play it like that. So they're actually pretty hard to find nowadays on reverb.com. You're looking at spending a couple grand on it. So Nick eventually graduates, and he is ready to join forces with John and start this new band. So in 1977, John is still playing with Shock Treatment, and he has one of these pivotal moments that's described in the book. He's performing with the band in front of what I assume would be his high school friends, high school crowd. And as he strummed the only 3 chords he knew on his cheap electric guitar, there was astonishment on the faces of his classmates, especially the girls. He used to be Nerdy Nigel, the guy who didn't play sports, but now people were looking at him differently. And he thought, even though he sucked, the gig sucked, the band sucked, I need more of this. Which I feel like there's your rock star story that
Yeah.
at least we all share.
I mean, Adam, I know you and I can both relate to that. We were just sort of like afterthoughts in high school. And then all of a sudden we played one gig and people were like, oh yeah, hey, how's it going? Yeah.
Right.
You're not a complete
Right.
total fucking suck. All right.
Right. It's sad that like, you know, the person that gets the first amount and most amount of attention is someone who could like throw something or like
Yeah.
kick something.
Yeah.
You know?
So John and Nick are still going out to see all these up and coming bands, really getting influenced by bands like The Clash, Human League, Susie and the Banshees, and perhaps my favorite, the B-52s that they saw at a club called Barbarella's. And get this, the B-52s had to keep stopping the show because of violence in the crowd.
Hey, everybody, stop punching each other. That's not cool.
But that just tells you what,
Fred.
you know, late 70s England was like. You go to a B-52 show and a fight breaks out, man, people are angsty.
That's why when the B-52s come through Portland, they always play at the zoo.
They play at the zoo?
Yeah. I don't know why. I think the last 3 times they played here, they played like in front of the elephant exhibit at the zoo.
Weird.
That is so Fred.
I respect that, honestly.
Right, I do, yeah. So it's 1978, and John starts attending the Birmingham Polytechnic College of Art and Design. And it's there that he meets this guy named Stephen Duffy. Now, Stephen Duffy was a songwriter and played the fretless bass. So Steve Duffy, John Taylor, and Nick Rhodes all wind up getting together at school, and they got along really well. And people really dug Nick, the keyboard player, very carefully curated glam look, just walking around campus. He had on his full regalia, makeup, the hair, the whole thing. And these guys form your typical nameless art college trio and wanted to sound like Velvet Underground, but if they were produced by Giorgio Moroder, who, if you don't know, is a synth and disco guy from the UK that I listened to a little bit. So those 3 guys form a very early version of Duran Duran. Trivia moment, Duran Duran is a reference to a character in the movie Barbarella. There was a guy named Dr. Durand with a D at the end, and they came up with the name after seeing that on TV in 1978. Very art school. But then in 1979, ironically, the band got a gig as Duran Duran at a famous Birmingham nightclub called Barbarella's. So Stephen Duffy, who was calling himself Stephen Dufay to be super pretentious,
Wow,
was the front man and putting on an overly foreboding vocal affectation. And as the story goes, he announced their first song of the night, called Lost Decade, as having been inspired by the writer F. Scott Fitzgerald. The crowd groaned loud enough for the entire band to hear them, which I just thought was delightful.
I mean, that sounds like some pretentious shit, though. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Again, very art school.
Yeah.
So Stephen Duffy, though, quickly ghosts the band and joins another band. And so Nick and John are out a bass player and a singer, and they also don't have a drummer. So enter a guy, another Taylor, Roger Taylor. So Roger Taylor was from the other side of town, from Hollywood, but everyone kind of knew each other because Birmingham is already a small city. It's already a small city, and the number of musicians was even smaller. Everybody went to the same clubs, hung out with the same group of people, were all forming bands. So he started out playing bass as a kid. His hands were too small, so he picked up drumsticks instead. And Roger was self-taught, basically playing along to Sabbath and Zeppelin and classic rock. But in the mid-70s, he got way into punk, which helped his chops a lot. The only drummer maybe in a punk band. Actually, I feel like drummers are the only good members or good musicians in a punk band, I'll say.
It's like by law, you know?
Right.
Like you have to have a good drummer.
A
Your
fast
bassist
drummer.
and guitar player have to kind of suck. Otherwise, it's not punk. Somebody was talking about it. We, you know, their favorite new segment. Somebody of our Patreon was saying their favorite new segment is it punk? And we'll bring it back briefly for right now. Is it punk to have a fretless bass player in your band who can really play? Absolutely not. Not
Right.
punk in
It's
any
the
way, shape,
least
or form.
punk thing in the
Right.
Punk thing ever.
So Roger played in the punk scene for a while, but he eventually gets a call from Dexy's Midnight Runners. Yes, the band who would eventually release the song Come On Eileen. So naturally, an up-and-coming drummer, desperately looking for a gig, being approached by a band poised for success, he says no. And after getting that offer, Dexy's Midnight Runner quickly went on to appear on Top of the Pops in January of 1980, and Roger was kicking himself.
You know, I'm going to just relate this to like a very funny story from very early on in the days of playing in the Chop. We'd all like recently moved to San Francisco, and Phil was working for some like hot shit tech startup. And we got a gig on Halloween in like a tiny little shit dive bar. Like nobody was going to come to that show. I think we had like 35 people there or something. Phil's work gives him 2 tickets to the Halloween party at the Playboy Mansion. And we then berate him into turning those tickets down so that he can come and be the second guitar player for our super shit dive bar gig that nobody came to.
I mean, come on, what's Phil gonna do at the Playboy Mansion?
You know what?
I mean,
I'd
jerk
li-
off
I'm-
Tommy Lee. Yeah.
I'm sure he would have liked to have found out, you know?
Yes. Oh man,
But
that
just
is a
the fact
story
that it was
I had
like
never heard.
it was no kind of question. We're like, well, you just got to get rid of those tickets, right?
Right,
He's like,
you gotta- I'm sorry,
yeah,
what guys?
you know, I guess I do. Like, yeah, come on, man. There's gonna be like 28 people at this show. Come on.
Man, Phil is a good friend, good band member. That is impressive.
Hi, Phil. He probably won't be listening.
Also, hi, Regina. You're welcome for keeping Phil away from the Playboy
Keeping
Mansion
Phil away
party.
from the
Yeah.
Playboy Mansion. All right, so obviously Roger had some regrets and thought that maybe he missed his one and only chance. But around that same time, he happens to see the drummerless version of Duran Duran playing around Birmingham. They had a rhythm machine, i.e. a drum machine at the time. So he approached the band, did a couple rehearsals, and things began to gel. Now, up until this point, John Taylor had been playing guitar, but he's one of those founding guys. He was on guitar, but upon hearing the song Everybody Dance by the band Chic, do you know that one? It's like a definite disco anthem. You'd probably recognize it. But he moves over to bass because he noted that the bass guitar in that song came across as the lead instrument. Foreshadowing. So we can definitely hear that on this album. Now, the band is now John Taylor on bass, Nick Rhodes on keys, Roger Taylor on drums, and a guy named Andy Wickett, who they picked up to play guitar. Things are feeling solid, so they head into a studio to record 4 songs for a demo. And by studio, I mean a small studio apartment owned by a guy named Bob Lamb, a producer who made the early UB40 demos. So they cut a demo, including the song Girls on Film, which would become one of their most popular songs, a song that was written by this short-lived frontman named Andy Wickett. Now, shortly after cutting that demo, Andy is eventually eased out of the band, as they say in the book, for being a less than dynamic frontman. Now, there's still some acrimony about this. According to a GoFundMe page for Andy Wickett on his own website, quote, Andy has autism and ADHD and was coerced into signing a piece of paper under the duress of nightclub owners with no legal representation present. 1 week later, Girls on Film was released. So there's still like some shit going on where one of their most popular songs, the song that put them on the map, was written by this guitar player named Andy Wickett, who was with the band for like 3 weeks or something.
Damn.
A little odd.
And they're saying that he didn't get any money from it.
Bingo. No credit and no money.
Man's got to get a good
Yeah.
lawyer. That seems like a slam dunk case.
Yeah. Come on,
Yeah.
prove it. Prove it.
I don't know. Yeah, you're right. I don't know what you're right. Maybe if he had a good case, it'd be settled and he wouldn't be on GoFundMe. Maybe he's just lazy and out of work. I don't know. All right, so now it's November 1979, and Duran Duran books more time in Bob Lamb's studio, and they record another demo tape. They also decide that, hey, we need to land a recording contract, so just go out and get one, right? So they tried just walking into some of these big record companies with no appointments, where they were quickly denied access, like EMI, Phonogram. They did, however, manage to get their foot in the door at Island Records, but were told, don't call us, we'll call you. And then Bob Lamb, this producer, tells them, guys, you're all like 17 and 18 years old. No one's going to listen to you just walking into their studio. You need management before any of these companies are going to talk to you. So the band is still trying to gig as much as possible and get as much exposure as they can. And they're trying to find gigs. They're literally just walking around Birmingham, knocking on doors and pubs and nightclubs to see if they can play. And they come across a place called the Rum Runner, which was Birmingham's biggest nightclub at the time. They were not super familiar with it because it catered to a slightly older and more sophisticated crowd. That is, it was classier than the spit and blood crowds of the punk scene that they were used to playing on. So they get into the club and they meet with a guy named Paul Barrow, who was one of two brothers who owned the club. The other brother was Michael, and they had inherited this club from their father. So the brothers had been trying to make this the Studio 54 of Birmingham because they had gone to New York City and seen Studio 54 2 years earlier. So they spent all their time and money trying to make this the hippest, most coke-filled place in Birmingham.
Yeah, but it still would not be even nearly as cool as like a third tier club in Manhattan, right? Like half
Right,
of
yeah,
Studio 54's
exactly.
attractions is fucking Manhattan, you know?
Right, and also I mentioned like the Columbia drug cartel isn't really popping off in UK at the time.
Yeah. They're not getting that pure Peruvian marching powder there.
Right.
So they meet this one brother, and Nick and John hand Paul a copy of their demo, and he takes it downstairs and puts it on the giant speaker system on the main dance floor of the club. And Paul likes what he hears. And he mentions that he and his brother are looking to get into band management.
That's such a Coke thing to say,
right?
It's like, hey, Emma, so I got this club. I'm really looking to get into management. They're like, Scott, guys, you got all these ideas. Like, I'm just picturing these like two coked out sucks who just fell ass backwards into a club and are like, how can I make some real money on this? I'm spending too much money on blow.
So the full band comes back that night and meets with the brothers, and they convince them to let Duran Duran play there in March of 1980. The brothers also agree to let the band use the club as a rehearsal space during the daytime. So pretty soon, they had all come to an agreement. The band's job was to write songs and develop their sound. The Burroughs' job was to find places for them to play, get them gear, and ultimately get them a record deal. So they played that first big gig at the Rum Runner, and they nailed it. But after some turmoil, they lost another guitarist and a singer that they had recently hired. So they were all still on the hunt for a steady band.
They were on the hunt.
They were on the hunt, right? They were hungry.
Yeah.
Like the wolves. So, all right, now the band members also started working at the club during the day because they're all broke. They're not making any money. So Roger, the drummer, would bust tables. John, the bass player, would work the front door. And Nick, the keyboardist, would also do shifts being the DJ. And the band starts now auditioning people to fill out their lineup. And they're very concerned with the look, as you can imagine. So a lot of great players who didn't look right and a lot of fashion-forward guys who sucked at their instrument. Now, this is the time of New Romantic. I joked at the top, but think of very flamboyant pirates. Dare I say it, gay pirates. And that's not a slam or an insult because Nick Rhodes is openly bisexual. I'm not sure when he came out. I think it was sometime in the 80s. But as DJ, he would start what he called the Bowie Night, which featured a lot of David Bowie, and a lot of the gay Birmingham crowd would come out to the club. Some folks even came out in the club. It was a big thing. Glam humanity is what he called it. So the band is still on the lookout for musicians, and they take out a big, expensive quarter-page ad in Melody Maker looking for a guitarist. All right, enter yet another Taylor. This time it's Andy Taylor. So Andy Taylor was a guitarist, similar in age to the rest of the band, but he grew up in an old fishing town 175 miles north of Birmingham. The guy grew up on fresh lobster, but also very rough hands.
So for him, he's like, Birmingham, bright lights, big city. This is like, oh my goodness, the Mecca of Birmingham. No offense to
was
Birmingham. I'm sure it's
yeah,
a lovely
sure.
place. Actually,
Yeah.
I've heard it's not that lovely, but I'm sure it's an okay place.
Jesus. minus 3 fans on the chart.
You know what? Listen, we all know the flaws of our cities. If somebody talks shit on my hometown, I'd be like, yeah, I
Yeah, that's
totally get
about
that.
right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We grew up in Delaware.
Yeah, we grew up. Yes.
Have at it, folks.
Yeah.
So he grew up in a pretty rough, no nonsense community, and he left home. This is Andy. He left home at 16, encouraged by his grandmother to take a chance on life and hoping that he could maybe avoid having to work in the brutal commercial fishing markets in the area. So he actually started playing guitar when he was 13, and he was gigging constantly wherever he could. And at 16, this is kind of cool, he gets a gig in a cover band that would play rock music at all of the American military bases in Germany and Italy. So this is the height of the Cold War, so there were plenty of American troops to entertain across Europe. And in 1980, Andy was looking for a new gig, which was around the same time Duran Duran had put their ad out in Melody Maker. And that's a great spot for our favorite segment of the show. We're going to run down Duran Duran by the numbers.
Finally, I was waiting for this. My favorite segment.
All right, here we go. 100, as in 100 million records worldwide since 1978. Now, that was singles and albums. That was from Billboard, and that number was from 2016. So potentially even more. 100 million. That is insane.
So it's from 2016, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it probably sold like 100 million 5,000 by now.
Yeah, exactly. I was say add 100 to that.
All right, 2000. That's the amount in US dollars you'll probably pay for a vintage Wasp synthesizer if you can find one. 2 octaves. Like I said, it's not actual keys. It's like a plastic pad with pictures of keys on it. Pretty damn cool.
Well, Korg made one of those, like a little handheld thing where you have a stylus.
Yeah. I forget.
Similar idea, I think. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. All right, 2000 again, but this time it's pounds. Let me try that again. The next number is again 2000, but this time it's pounds. In 1981, the band had a big showcase gig in Paris before they really hit it big. In order to make sure they had a good showing, they paid £2,000 to bus in a bunch of regulars from the Run Runner in England, many in costume, full drag, to make sure the still unknown band got a good showing at the club.
Okay, you know what? I talked shit on cokehead shifty managers from before, but that's a good move. That's a pro move. Good on them. Yeah.
For 2000, it's probably worth it. All right, our next number is 16. It's the number of albums Duran Duran has released over the course of their 46-year career.
Pretty good.
Yeah. All right, 2.9 million. That's the number of copies of this album, of Rio, that were sold as of 1991. Man, Wikipedia and some of these other archive sites are struggling. So I assume it's got to be, again, a little bit more than that.
That doesn't line up. That doesn't line up with the 100 million.
Yeah, no, right? It really doesn't. Yeah. This is their biggest album by far, right?
That's this album, but they released a ton of singles. In fact, off of this album, there were 3 or 4 that I think also sold a ton. 5,000 is our next number. More pounds. 5,000 pounds was the budget allotted for clothing in the first contract they signed. More on that in a bit. 600. That's the number of gigs that guitarist Andy Taylor had played by the time he was 18 years old. This kid was a workhorse. Some of the contracts for those military bases that he played at called for him and his band to play 6 hours a night. That is insane.
Yeah.
And it also make you really good.
If your alternative is being out in the North Sea, trying to scrape a living from the fauna of the ocean, I think I'll take a 6-hour gig any day of the week.
Yeah,
my wrist is a little bit sore after this.
Versus getting washed out to the ocean.
Like, I have a fucking peg leg, man. Like, I lost it below the knee from a fishing accident.
And our last number is 30. as in 30 seconds. And that is how long it will take for you to head over to our Patreon page to sign up. And here's the best part.
Oh, damn.
It's
That's good.
completely free for you to sign up and get updates on the podcast, to participate in some of our listener polls, and even vote on some of our upcoming episode ideas. Sure, there is a paid section where you can get some truly hilarious extra content, but either way, Patreon is a great place to dive in with comments and complain along with us. I hit a book over here. So that link is patreon.com/1001 album complaints. As usual, that link is going to be in the episode notes.
Dude, Adam.
All right, so let's get back to the band. So Andy Taylor answers the call and heads to Birmingham to audition for the band at their home base, the Rum Runner. So he shows up. He's not dressed like a pirate, so the band is skeptical. But after hearing him play, they're all pretty excited. Andy would later say that he couldn't believe in the middle of the day that people were hanging out at the Rum Runner and were dressed in silk scarves and blonde dreadlocks and shoes that would have gotten you stabbed in Newcastle. So anyway, Andy gets the offer and he takes the gig. Now, once Andy started rehearsing with the band, he brought a lot of the insight and ideas that he had gotten from playing 600 gigs. He brought that to all the arrangements that they had already set up. And one quote I loved from him was that he told the band, "Don't bore us, get to the chorus," which I thought was hilarious and kind of like pop music instructions.
And it rhymes.
And it rhymes, yes. The band is really coming together, but they still don't have a proper front man. And it just so happens that one of the female bartenders at the Rum Runner has an ex-boyfriend. That ex-boyfriend just so happened to be former child actor, poet, acting student, theater kid, and singer who loved to dress up, a guy named Simon Le Bon. A guy who once said in an interview that he was even surprised he didn't turn out gay. Now, Simon had been in show business from a very young age, doing commercials at age 7. He was a choir boy whose choir master had recorded him singing hymns in the church at age 13. And at age 17, he finished his school and he went on to study drama and theater at the University of Birmingham. That is, of course, until he got that fateful call from his ex-girlfriend at the Rum Runner telling him that the band was looking for a singer.
See, that's just a lesson to everybody. Make sure your breakups go well.
Oh, definitely.
Someday, that easily could have been like, oh, fuck that dude.
Right.
There's no way I'm giving him a call, asshole. She's going to be with my best friend. But no, it sounds like things probably ended pretty well.
But and also, like, if you look at all the child actors who have started bands, the success rate is really low. So
Corey
good
Feldman.
good for him. Right?
Corey Feldman's the only one I can think of because I love him.
Right. Oh, I think Macaulay Culkin has a band. I don't know. I'm sure he does.
Sounds like something he would do. Honestly, if you had, like $40 million of Home Alone money and you do whatever the fuck you want, I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll finance a band. We're going to tour Europe. It's going to be great.
Right.
So Simon shows up to the club wearing a white dinner jacket over a pair of maroon leopard skin pants, and it was love at first sight. So in addition to kind of matching vibes, Simon also showed up with a notebook full of lyrics and poems, and that sealed the deal. So the band starts practicing. Simon is just jumping in, pulling lyrics out of his notebook and adding them into these instrumental songs that had already been written by the band.
There's a quote from the documentary that I watched where Simon Le Bon is describing this initial meeting where he just sort of got into the band, and he's asking Nick Rhodes, like, well, like, what kind of gigs are we going to play? And apparently Nick Rhodes, with all seriousness, was like, we're going to play Madison Square Garden. He's like, what? We're going to play Madison Square Garden? And he's like, oh yeah, no, I mean, not now, but it's going to happen. He's like, that confidence really sold me on the band. I was like, okay, I think I can be down for this.
So as soon as Simon joins the band, the club owners, the Barrow brothers, bought a ton of new gear for the band, new synth, new bass, and the band signs a formal management contract with the brothers and their newly formed production company that they call Tritech Music. And on July 16th of 1980, Duran has their first performance at the Rum Runner that would be called the first official gig from Duran with their classic lineup. Now, by September of 1980, the Barrow brothers were really desperate to land a record deal for Duran Duran and their unique, sexy boy band energy that was coming from the Run Runner. And there was a lot of competition in the space, though, especially in this new romantic genre that was popping up. You got Boy George and Culture Club, the Spandau Ballet, Depeche Mode, Adam and the Ants. Frilly shirts, floppy hair, designer suits, makeups, ascots were everywhere. So
I have to say, the Spandau Ballet, I'm pretty sure that that name comes from, it's like a really morbid name. The Spandau Ballet was apparently what in World War One, when bodies would get stuck in the barbed wire and then would keep getting hit by bullets, they would like,
Oh my God.
and that was what the Spandau Ballet was in reference to.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty fucked up. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that that's right. I have not fact checked that recently, but I remember hearing that a while back.
that's crazy. There must have been something about naming bands in England that was just really morbid, because there were in the book, they were just talking about how many bands were based on, the names were based on like things that happened in World War II with the Nazis, like the Joy Division. And there were a couple other ones where you're like, oh, yeah, this is all reference to Germany in World War II. Very odd.
Yeah.
All right. So the band does the familiar route, opening for anyone they can to spread the word. So they toured with a group called Hazel O'Connor. It wasn't a group, it was a singer. She had a backup band, but it was Hazel O'Connor. She had just released an album, very new age pop, new age rock. The band is super poor at this point as they're following her around the country. They could only afford one hotel room. So they'd take turns sleeping in the bed and then rotating out to the van to sleep on equipment or on the seats. Dude,
Hey, that's not unheard of.
No.
Yeah, right.
In all honesty, like
So you mean touring?
yeah, I toured
Sure,
with five
yeah.
guys and we got 5 guys in that bed. It's like,
Oh,
come
nice.
on,
All
dude,
right, there.
nothing wrong with that. Just cram one in. We had a king size.
I went on tour and we went to LA and this person was like, "You two can stay at my place. You two can't. Find
Yeah.
somewhere else to stay."
Were you one of the two that could?
No.
That's being cool helps.
Right.
So even though they have no money, they're opening, record execs start taking notice of the band when they see the audience that's forming around Duran Duran, especially the crowds of young, pretty girls who were showing up to all the gigs. And before long, there's a bidding war for Duran Duran between EMI and Phonogram. But the band ultimately signs with EMI mainly because of EMI's ability to push the band overseas in the Americas. Technically, though, the Barrows company, Tritech Music, actually signs the deal with EMI, not Duran Duran. So now EMI gives Tritech Music 42,000, gives them a 42,000 pound advance upon signing. And that money, of course, was used to produce an album, a tour, and some videos, and of course, that clothing budget. So December 8th, they sign that record deal. They're super happy. And December 9th, John Lennon is killed in New York City. So it was a muted celebration.
He was killed on December 8th, just say, because I know that
really?
because it's my birthday, yeah.
Oh, shit.
So maybe it's the 7th and the 8th.
Yeah. Maybe it just took that much time for the steamer ship to get across to Birmingham.
Yeah, maybe right.
Well done. Thank you for the spot check. Of course.
Like I said, it's my birthday, so it's,
right.
It's the only way I know.
Yeah, right.
Any date.
Marty's just giving away all of his like security questions.
Right.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm gonna.
And it's also my password.
It's your blood type and your social.
Yeah. Interesting. My mother's maiden name is Laban. You never know.
Right.
And my first pet. All right, now it's time to record their debut. So they head into Abbey Road Studios, and it was terrible. At least for them. The producer, the guy they hired, just couldn't get anything right in the studio. It just wasn't flowing. So they wound up jumping ship and going to Red Bus Studios in West London, and they had the album done in 2 weeks. So they released their first album called Duran Duran on June 15th of 1981. And by early 1982, it hit number 3 in the UK charts. And 2 months later, MTV is launched in the US. Now, Duran Duran, to Tom's point earlier, definitely took advantage of this new medium. The keyboard player, Nick, said that video is to us like stereo was to Pink Floyd. And it didn't take long now for record execs in Los Angeles to take note of Duran Duran, specifically Capitol Records, which was the American arm of EMI. Now, it's kind of funny that nobody at Capitol Records liked the album or the look or the hair, but it had been a few years since an English band had broken through in the US, so they were hoping to push Duran Duran on the American audiences ASAP.
We don't like the music, we don't like how you dress, but you are shockingly good looking. I mean, Simon Le Bon looks like the villain in like an 80s teen movie or something like that. He's just
Totally.
classically good looking, blonde
Strong
hair.
jaw, big
Yeah.
nose. Yeah, he does.
Also, you have like Depeche Mode and Tears for Fears and all these other early '80s bands that are. I thought all these bands broke huge in the U.S. It's kind of interesting to hear
That's a good
that there would
point.
be a struggle, you know.
Now, it could have just been with Capitol. So it could have been that
Oh,
Capitol
right. It was
didn't have
specific
a
to
British,
the right.
didn't have an English band that hit.
Depeche Mode was, in terms of like a look and highly stylized, Depeche Mode was kind of more in that vein. But I do think that Duran Duran kind of took the cake when it came to the entire package of an experience, you know, of like super good looking guys singing songs that have a little funk and you can kind of dance to, also making stuff that's a little bit using new technology and sounds fresh. And so I could see that being a total package that a record executive would glom onto and be like, oh man, I showed this to my daughter and she said it was great. So all right, yeah, let's get
all
these
the
guys a
hard work's
contract.
done. You just have to start selling the records and pushing the videos.
Right.
So in September of that year, the band heads to the US for a 6-week tour of the US that would take them from New York to Los Angeles. And while they're in New York, they meet with the guys who invented MTV. And the band was encouraged to make more videos with an MTV audience in mind, because now the band could reach a few million fans a couple times a day. And this is when MTV was desperate for material. They had like, maybe 2 hours of material that they would just loop. So they were asking everybody to make videos.
All the white people to make videos.
Right. Yes, of course.
I mean, I feel like they were always on a loop, even as when I was a kid. I feel like they only had 40 minutes of videos that they would just like play over and over and over and over again. But I'm sure they had even less then.
Simon Le Bon would later say that he and the band saw music videos not just as promotional vehicles, but as a new art form that would accompany and enhance their music. So the band worked their way across the US and plenty of debauchery, and they wind up at the Playboy Mansion where they didn't see Phil, which is a real bummer. They also stayed at a place called the Riot House. Well, it actually was called the Continental Hyatt House, but it got the nickname Riot House because of all the people who would stay there and destroy it. This is the same place where Keith Moon, the drummer for The Who, drove a limo into the in-ground pool one night.
Nice. It was interesting hearing Simon Le Bon and Nick Rhodes talk a bit about how kind of naive they said that they were when they first started. It's like, when we first started and like got big, like we didn't even know like what cocaine was. And then all of a sudden it was just this like whirlwind of everybody's just throwing money
Giving
and
them
women
stuff.
and drugs. And you're just like, what the fuck? I was like a nerdy theater kid. Like
a couple years ago. Yeah.
Like last
year. Maybe a year ago. Yeah,
maybe a year ago. I was just like a nerdy theater eccentric kid who was getting shunned in all except for the weird little enclaves within my working class town. And now I'm the toast of the town. And, here's drugs, here's women, here's alcohol, fucking party, wreck the hotel. It was interesting to hear them say that this was in the context of them making another record in like 2005 or something like that. And like, we actually feel like we felt when we were originally a band, because now we all have like families and our shit's all together, and we're not going to fall down this spiral of debauchery because it's the first time we've ever seen it. Like, we can be more focused on the music, which I thought was an interesting approach, because you don't necessarily think of that.
And look what happened to like Keith Moon and John Bonham, the original Hotel Destroyers,
Yes.
They're fine, right? They're
R.I.P.
still making music today, I think. New age stuff, right?
They're I believe they're pastors now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they're
evangelical pastors.
they're writing all the new hymnals.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
So after an action-packed 6 weeks in the US, they head back to England. And in February of 1982, the label is clamoring for a follow-up album. But this time around, as quickly as it had come, New Romantic is out and a rock-edged dance pop is in. The label even said they wanted something like, quote, Led Zeppelin and Talking Heads have a baby. So, which I guess you could kind of...
No, that sounds stupid.
Right.
Record executives are idiots. Sounds terrible.
So now the band already had a good number of songs ready to go. And with a budget from EMI of £65,000, they go back into the studio. And that brings us finally to tonight's album, and that is Rio. Now, 4 of the songs that appear on Rio had already been recorded the prior August in one of EMI's studios. All the other songs, with the exception of The Chauffeur, which is the last song on the album, had already been arranged as well. So it was not an arduous task. They were in and out of the studio very quickly for the second album. So they go into Air Studios in London, which was founded by George Martin and had some of the newest and hottest tech at the time. Nick, the keyboard player, was really into learning all the science and mechanics of record making. And so he was always the first in the morning and the last to leave in the evening. And something else I found interesting, and I think I spotted where it is on the album. Roger, the drummer, said he wanted to do a mix of actual acoustic drums and some electronic drums. So what he did was to put electronic drum pads only on his toms. So the kick, the snare, and the hi-hat were actually mic'd. And then when he goes to the toms, you get the doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, you know, that kind of like laser shotgun sound. Kind of cool. The album Rio also had a $200,000 budget for videos from EMI. They went to Sri Lanka. They went to Sri Lanka to record a bunch of videos for the album. In total, they made videos for 6 of the 9 tracks on this album. Pretty bad.
Going for it, yeah.
Absolutely.
I like how they probably spent 20% of the budget just getting to Sri Lanka. Like,
yeah.
It's like when Adam Sandler makes a movie and he's like, how about it's in Kenya? I just want to spend 8 weeks in Kenya on somebody else's dime.
I want to go on vacation with my family.
Yeah. They have to helicopter one band member at a time.
You can't carry them all.
Right.
All right, gents, what do you say we jump into some of these sweet tunes?
Can't wait.